The teacup hit the marble and broke into 5 clean pieces. And for a moment, the whole lobby went quiet enough to hear the Chinook wind working at the tall windows. The woman who had been holding it did not flinch. She looked down at the tea steaming on the heated stone floor of one of the most expensive hotels in the Canadian Rockies, at the shards fanned out around her boots, and then she looked back up at the person who had slapped the cup out of her hand. No cry, no scramble, just a stillness that several people in that lobby would later struggle to describe, except to say it had frightened them more than any shouting could have. Nobody there knew her name. Nobody had thought to ask. They had watched her come in out of the storm in a faded parka and a wool toque worn soft at the brim, dragging a canvas duffel that had clearly crossed a great many miles, and in the time it takes to pour a glass of water, they had decided exactly who she was and exactly how little she mattered. They were wrong. The kind of wrong that does not stay quiet. By the time the sun came up over the mountains the next morning, the company that owned that lobby would begin losing money the way those slopes shed snow in a thaw all at once, with a helpless speed, and far more of it than anyone in that building would have believed. Her name was Amara Sefa. She had grown up in a third-floor walk-up in Scarborough, where the radiator knocked all winter and never quite warmed the back bedroom. And she had spent the first 19 years of her life being looked at the way the duty manager was looking at her now. She knew the look from the inside out. That was, in a sense, the whole reason she was standing in this lobby at all. It had started small, the way most disasters do. A storm had come down hard out of the northwest and shut the highway through the pass, stranding a long line of travelers in Canmore and Banff with nowhere to sleep. Amara had been driving back alone from 3 quiet days at a friend's cabin near Lake Louise. No security, no assistant, no driver. She traveled like that on purpose, and had for years. She had learned a long time ago that you never see the truth of a place from the front, where everyone is on their best behavior. You see it from the bottom, where people stop performing, because they have decided you are not worth the effort. So she kept the old parka. She kept the toque. She carried her own bag. And when the highway closed, and the radio said it would not reopen until morning, she pulled into the only place with rooms left and walked up to the front desk of the Aurelian like anyone else. The Aurelian was the crown of Meridian Hospitality Group, a chain that traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange under 3 quiet letters and had been bleeding money for 18 months. In a way, its quarterly statements worked very hard to dress up. Amara had been reading those statements the whole time. She owned 12% of Meridian through a numbered holding company that appeared on no website and no investor page, and for the better part of a year, she had been in slow, careful talks with its board to lead a $300 million recapitalization that would keep the whole group from going under. The papers were ready. The signing was set for 9 the next morning on a video call from a boardroom on Bay Street. The board knew a major investor was coming to save them. They did not know. It was the woman now standing at their flagship front desk with melting snow on her shoulders, being told there was no record of her reservation. There was a record. She watched the clerk find it, and then watched the duty manager lean over, read it, and decide she didn't like it. The duty manager's name was Bridget Calloway, and she had the particular polish of someone who has trained herself to seem warm without ever actually being so. Her eyes moved over Amara once. The parka, the duffel, the absence of any logo or jewel or designer anything. And something behind them cooled like a thermostat clicking down. She asked to see the confirmation again. Amara held out her phone. The booking was right there. Paid in full, a corner suite. Bridget looked at it far longer than reading it required. "I'm not sure this is going to work tonight," she said, in the gentle voice people use right before they make your evening worse. "We've had some issues with third-party bookings. Fraud, mostly. You understand." From a leather chair near the great stone fireplace, a man in a camel hair coat looked up from his whiskey and let out a short laugh. He had the loose, flushed face of someone several drinks past his limit, and the unbothered confidence of a man who has never once in his life been asked to explain himself. "Bridget," he called, amused. "I think your guest took a wrong turn. Staff entrance is round the side." A few people near him smiled into their drinks. A couple in matching ski sweaters became very interested in their phones. Amara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Bridget and waited. "My booking is paid," Amara said. Her voice was low and even. "I'd just like my room." Bridget's mouth tightened. She set the phone down on the counter, not into Amara's hand, just down, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to touch any longer than necessary. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the desk. There are guests waiting." There were not. The lobby was nearly empty, the storm having driven everyone indoors hours ago. "If you can't provide a valid card matching the reservation, I'll have to ask you to leave the property." "The card on file is valid," Amara said. "You're looking at the confirmation." What happened next happened fast, the way these things only happen to people who have never imagined a consequence. Amara reached past Bridget to pick her phone back up off the counter, and Bridget, flustered, certain, and quietly furious at being made to feel uncertain in her own lobby, knocked the cup of complimentary tea out of Amara's other hand. Maybe it was meant to look accidental. It didn't. The cup smashed, and then Bridget put a hand flat against Amara's shoulder and pushed, hard enough that Amara took a step backward into the door of the vestibule, the cold rushing in around her. "Out," Bridget said. "Now." For one held breath, nobody moved. The man in the camel coat had stopped smiling. The couple in ski sweaters had gone rigid. A young woman behind the bell stand, barely out of her teens, stood frozen with a luggage tag still in her fingers. Amara straightened. She did not raise her voice. She knelt, calmly, and began picking the broken pieces of the cup up off the floor, one at a time, setting them in her palm so no one would step on them later. When she stood, she looked at Bridget for a moment longer than was comfortable. "You just made," she said quietly, "the most expensive decision of your career. You don't know that yet. You will." Bridget rolled her eyes. She told the security guard who had drifted over to walk the woman to her car, and she said it loudly enough for the lobby to hear, the way people do when they want witnesses to their authority. Amara handed the broken shards to the young woman at the bell stand, gently, almost as an apology for the mess, and walked out into the snow without looking back. She did not hurry. She crossed the lot to her car, sat in the dark with the engine running and the heat climbing, and let the cold drain out of her hands. Then she did two things. The first was a text to a lawyer in Toronto named Desmond, who had been quietly building the Meridian file for 7 months and would understand it instantly. She typed 2 words: "Pull it." She put the phone in the cup holder and watched the dot appear under the message. Then the reply, just as fast: "Understood, tonight." The second was a call to a woman named Halima, who ran Amara's life with the calm of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything years ago, and who picked up on the first ring at 11:30 at night, the way she always did. "Cancel the 9 o'clock, Amara said. "The whole thing. Have Desmond issue a formal withdrawal of the offer before 3. Standard language, no reason given." Halima asked no questions. She never did. That was most of why Amara trusted her without reservation. "Are you all right?" was all she said. Amara looked out the windshield at the warm gold light of the lobby, at the people moving behind the glass who had decided she was nobody. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm always fine. That's not the part that matters." To understand why a single shove in a hotel lobby could cost a company a fortune, you have to understand the woman who absorbed it, and almost no one ever bothered to. Amara's mother had cleaned offices on the night shift in towers downtown and had come home in the gray before dawn, smelling of industrial lemon, and she had told her daughter the same thing so many times it had become a kind of weather in the apartment. They will measure you by what you're wearing until you make that impossible. Amara had been the only black girl in her engineering cohort, then one of very few black women in the entire tech sector of a country that liked to think of itself as too polite for any of that to matter. She had learned that politeness and fairness are not the same thing. She had learned it at front desks, at bank counters, in the back rows of waiting rooms where her chart somehow kept ending up at the bottom of the pile. so she had stopped asking permission. She and 3 friends had started a company out of a rented unit above a roadie shop. The 4 of them sleeping on the floor that first winter because rent and payroll could not both be paid. And they had built infrastructure software that nobody wanted right up until the moment everybody did. By year 4, it turned a profit. By year 7, it was enormous. By the time she took Luminous Systems public, a business magazine she was too busy to read had quietly listed her among the country's self-made billionaires, and she had marked the occasion by buying her mother a small house with a furnace that worked and reinvesting nearly everything else. She did not perform any of it. She kept the same modest condo for years past the point where she could have bought the building. She moved her money into quiet places, stakes in airlines and logistic firms and hotel groups that often had no idea whose fund held their shares. Meridian Hospitality was one of those, and the reason she had been willing to put $300 million into saving it was not sentiment. It was that she had believed from the numbers that the rot in the company was financial and fixable. Tonight, in that lobby, she had learned otherwise. She had learned that the rot was in the marrow, in what the company became when it thought no one important was watching. She was always watching. And now, sitting in a cold car in a parking lot in the Bow Valley, she understood with perfect, unhurried clarity exactly what she was going to do, and exactly why. Inside, the young woman from the bell stand stood holding a palmful of broken china and could not make herself throw it away. Her name was Maya Tran. She was 20, working nights at the Aurelian to cover the part of her college tuition her scholarship didn't, and she had seen the whole thing from 10 feet away. She had also seen something the others hadn't. When the guest's phone had been lying face up on the counter, the lock screen had been showing a calendar alert, and Maya, who noticed things, had read the top line of it without meaning to. It said the same word that had been circulating through the back offices of the hotel for weeks, spoken in hushed, hopeful tones by managers who thought the staff weren't listening. Meridian. 9 a.m. Cepha. Maya didn't know what it meant exactly, but she knew the company that signed her paycheck was in trouble, and she knew the name of the person everyone was upstairs was praying would save it, and she was fairly sure she had just watched that name get shoved out into a snowstorm. She went to find Bridget. She found her in the back office, flushed and pleased with herself, telling a coworker that you had to be firm with that type, or they'd walk all over you. Maya said, as steadily as she could manage, that she thought the woman who'd just been removed might be the investor everyone had been talking about. Bridget looked at her the way you look at a child who has said something embarrassing. "Sweetheart," Bridget said, "billionaires don't show up at my front desk in a $40 parka with a hockey bag. Go restock the lobby and let the adults handle the adult things." Maya went back to the lobby. She restocked it, and then she sat in the little office off the bell stand for a long time with her hands flat on the desk, and she thought about her mother, who had also worn a $40 parka most of Maya's childhood, and she did the thing she had been told not to do. She wrote it all down, everything she had seen, plainly in order. She attached the timestamps from the front desk system, showing the paid reservation that had been refused. She found the corporate escalation address that staff were supposed to use only in genuine emergencies, and she sent her report to the regional director, to the head of guest experience, and to the office of the chief executive, all three at 12:40 in the morning. She read it over twice before she hit send. Then she sat back and felt her heart going like a rabbit, and was quietly, terribly certain she had just ended her own job. Down in Toronto, the machinery had already begun to turn. Desmond filed the formal withdrawal at 2:12. A withdrawal of a financing offer this large, this close to signing, does not stay secret, because too many people on both sides have been waiting on it. By 3, a markets reporter who kept odd hours and good sources had done the arithmetic. A major rescue investment, widely expected, even if never announced, vanishing the night before signing, and had published a short, careful item under a headline that did not need to be dramatic to be devastating. 4 paragraphs, restrained, sourced only to people familiar with the matter. But the facts carried the weight on their own, and the facts were stark. $300 million that the market had been quietly counting on were gone, and no one would say why. The question circulating in certain rooms by 6 that morning was not whether Meridian had a problem. It was how big the problem was and how fast the market would price it. The TSX opened at 9:30. By 9:41, Meridian's stock was down 9%. By 10:15, it had dropped 16. The original item had been picked up by two larger outlets, and a former board member who had quit in a governance fight a year before gave one of them a quote that was measured and damaging in exactly equal proportion. By 11, the stock was off 23%. Somewhere between $40 and $70 million of the company's value had evaporated in a single morning, depending on the moment you chose to measure it, and the moments kept getting worse. In a glass-walled boardroom, 40 floors above Bay Street, the chief executive of Meridian Hospitality, a silver-haired man named Lawrence Pruitt, sat at the head of the table and watched people he had known for 2 decades arrange their faces into the particular expression powerful men get when they have worked out who is going to absorb the blame. The question that kept rising and sinking and rising again, like something that would not stay underwater, was the simplest one. Why? The deal had been months in the making. The terms were agreed. The contracts had been through counsel 4 times, and then, the night before signing, a withdrawal with no explanation at all. It was the general counsel who connected it. There was an incident report, she said, that had come up the escalation chain overnight from a property out west. It had been sitting unread in several inboxes since well after midnight. She read it aloud. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Someone asked for the lobby footage from the Aurelian. It took half an hour to pull and load onto the screen at the end of the table, and then a boardroom full of executives watched, in silence, the security feed from their own flagship lobby. Watched a woman in a worn parka be refused a room she had paid for, watched a manager watched her kneel to gather the pieces of a broken cup so that no one else would be cut by them, and watched her walk out into the snow. The general counsel had already matched the face to a photo from a magazine profile. She slid a printout down the long table without a word. Lawrence Pruitt looked at it for a long moment. When he finally spoke, what he said was not eloquent, but it was accurate. He set the page down and he said, very quietly, "We did this to ourselves." Nobody disagreed. Out at the Aurelian, Bridget Calloway was summoned to the property's administrative office by a message on her personal phone because her work phone had been remotely locked at 9:01. She arrived in full uniform, the way people do when they are reaching for the uniform as armor, still certain there had been a misunderstanding. The regional director was there, and a man from human resources she had never met, and a lawyer. The room was small and had no window. There was a pitcher of water on the table, and no one offered to pour it. Bridget began to explain. She said the guest had been difficult, that she had refused to follow protocol, that the complaint was an exaggeration, that 9 years of service ought to count for something against one bad night. The lawyer let her finish. Then he turned a printed still from the lobby footage around on the table so she could see it, her own hand flat against the shoulder of a woman she now, finally, recognized, and slid it toward her. Something moved across Bridget's face. It was the first instant in all of it that she truly understood the size of what she had done, and to whom, and what it was going to cost. And even then, what crossed her face was not remorse. It was the white shock of someone learning that the world is not, after all, arranged for their comfort. Her access had already been revoked. Her email was already dark. The conversation took 11 minutes. By midday, it was everywhere a story goes when it has all the right pieces in the right order. The footage was out, from a guest's phone, from the hotel's own cameras, the chain of custody never quite clear. A national news anchor ran it at noon with the careful neutrality that is its own kind of verdict. The segment cutting between the lobby video and a graph of Meridian stock falling like a stone down the side of a mountain. People who had never set foot in one of the company's hotels who had no money in the stock and no reason to care, watched the clip and felt something tighten in their chests because almost everyone has stood at some counter somewhere and been measured and found wanting. The video was not really about a hotel. That was why it traveled. And somewhere in the comments and the kitchen table arguments, a harder question began to surface. The one that does not have a comfortable answer. Would any of this have happened if she'd been ordinary? If the woman in the parka really had been nobody? A cleaner, a student, a mother down to her last $40. Would the cameras have run? Would the company have flinched? Or would she simply have gone home cold and humiliated? And would the lobby have forgotten her by the next morning? It was a good question. It deserved a better answer than revenge. Amara Saifa thought it deserved a better answer too. That was the part almost everyone missed. She did not enjoy the next few days. People kept telling her she must be enjoying them, and she found she could not explain why she wasn't. Watching a company come apart is not satisfying when you have spent a year of your life trying to keep it whole, and when you know that the people who will actually suffer are not the executives in the glass tower, but the housekeepers in the line, cooks, and the kids working the bell stand to pay tuition. The ones at the bottom always pay first. She knew that better than anyone in this story, because she had once been one of them. So she did not simply walk away and let Meridian sink. She made a phone call, and then several, and within a week she was back at a table with what remained of the board. Humbled now, careful now, and she put a new offer on the table. It was smaller than the first, and on harder terms, because the company was worth less than it had been, and because she was not in the business of pretending otherwise. But the real difference was not the number. The real difference was everything attached to it. The new money came with conditions written into the contractual architecture, conditions her legal team had spent the better part of 3 weeks building, and that she had read line by line herself. Independent audits of how guests and staff were actually treated, not how the brochure said they were. Direct reporting lines so that a junior employee who saw something wrong could not be silenced by the manager standing over them. Senior bonuses tied, in part, to dignity, to anonymous surveys from the people who cleaned the rooms and carried the bags and stood at the desks, the people whose opinion had never once shown up on a balance sheet before. She was not interested in firing one bad manager and calling it justice. One bad manager is never the disease. One bad manager is a symptom of a building that rewarded her for years and would have gone on rewarding her if the wrong person hadn't walked through the door. Amara had no intention of changing the messaging. She intended to change the marrow, which is a slower and far less satisfying project, and the only one that ever actually works. There was one more thing she did, and it was the thing she had thought about most. 4 weeks after the storm, Maya Tran's phone rang while she was studying for a midterm, from a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was warm and direct, and belonged to a woman named Halima, who explained, without ceremony, that Ms. Sefa had reviewed an incident report submitted from the Aurelian on the night in question, that she had been particularly interested in the person who wrote it, and that there was an opening on the team being built to oversee the new guest experience standards across the entire Meridian group. Ms. Sefa wondered whether Maya might be willing to come in for a conversation. The conversation happened a week later and lasted 40 minutes. Near the end of it, Amara, who had been quiet and watchful the whole time, asked the only question she really cared about the answer to. She asked Maya why she had sent that report at 12:40 in the morning when she had been told, directly, by her own manager to let it go. Maya thought about it. She did not give the polished answer. She said that she had grown up watching her mom get treated the way that woman in the lobby had been treated, and that nobody had ever written anything down for her mom, and that she had known, sitting in that little office, that if she went home and slept and did nothing, she would wake up the next day having become a person she didn't want to be. It had felt, she said, less like a brave choice and more like the only one she could live with. Amara nodded slowly and asked her nothing further on that subject. The offer came the next day. Maya accepted it in under an hour, and the first thing she did with her first real paycheck was buy her mother a proper winter coat, the kind that doesn't let the cold in at the seams. The world moved on after that the way it actually does, which is to say not cleanly and not all at once. Meridian survived, smaller and chastened, at a lower altitude than before, and began the long, unglamorous work of trying to become something other than what it had been. Bridget Calloway found work eventually, in a different city, in a job that had nothing to do with hotels, and whether the quiet that settled around her new life was the quiet of a lesson learned or only the quiet of consequence endured was something that remained, even to her, unclear on most mornings. The man in the camel hair coat went on being the man in the camel hair coat, because the world is full of them, and they rarely sit in a lobby long enough to be changed. And Amara went back to work. She gave one interview and turned down a dozen. She expanded the foundation she had started years before, and that spring it increased its scholarships for first-generation engineering students by half again, the kind of student she had once been, sleeping on a floor above a roadie shop with the heat off to save money. In the early summer, she stood at a podium in a community center in Scarborough, 3 blocks from the walk-up, where the radiator used to knock all winter, and she spoke to a room full of teenagers without notes. She told them she had spent most of her life learning one thing, and that it had cost her every year of the learning, and that it was worth it. She said that real power, not the kind you borrow from a title or a uniform or a set of assumptions about who belongs where, but the real kind, the kind that's still there when everything else has been stripped away, comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the whole room is doing its level best to make you forget. She said, the quietest person in any room is very often the one paying the closest attention. And she said that the person paying the closest attention is very often, at the one moment that matters, the only person who knows what to do. And she thought, when she said it, of a 20-year-old at a bell stand who had written something down at 12:40 in the morning when she'd been told to let it go. She stepped back, and the room rose, and she was never quite sure what to do with her hands during applause. So she found the edge of the stage and walked off it the way she walked into every room, simply as herself, without performance. Outside, the long northern evening was just starting to cool, the light going gold and then gray over the rooftops. Halima was waiting by the car, with her coat and a coffee, at exactly the right temperature, and the two of them drove back through the city without speaking for the first while, which was another thing Halima had understood for years, without being told. Through the window, Amara watched the ordinary evening go by. A kid in a Raptors jersey dribbling a ball under a streetlight. A woman in scrubs waiting at a bus shelter, with her eyes closed and her head tipped back, resting in whatever small increment the day had left her. Amara watched the woman in scrubs until the car turned, and she was gone, and she thought about all the people who would never end up in a story like this one. The ones who got pushed and went home cold and got up the next morning and went back, because there was no holding company in their name. No lawyer waiting for 2 words at midnight, no camera that happened to be running. She thought about what she owed them. She thought about what any person owes the others when they happen, for whatever reason, to end up holding the power to make the world behave differently for an afternoon. Don't waste it, she thought. Don't sit quietly inside it. Spend it carefully on the plainest possible truth that every single person who walks through a door deserves to be treated like a person before they've proven one single thing. It was not a radical idea. It was the oldest one there was. People simply kept forgetting it, and other people kept paying for the forgetting. And every so often the world got reminded in terms it could not ignore. She hoped this had been one of those times. The car climbed the ramp onto the highway, the lights of the city spreading out gold and endless below them, and she let herself believe, with the careful, earned optimism of a person who has watched things change slowly and knows what slow change really looks like, that it had.